Not every clash announces itself with hostility. Some begin quietly, wrapped in confidence so solid it feels unquestionable. The man who stepped forward had never needed to doubt outcomes. His size had always spoken first. His weight had always settled disagreements before they fully formed. Doors opened, spaces cleared, and hesitation appeared in others, long before he had to act. To him, strength was obvious, visible, and reliable. Opposite him stood Bruce Lee, alone and unreadable. No audience, no performance, no effort to be acknowledged. He did not challenge the space or claim it. He simply occupied it, fully and without tension. At first glance, the situation seemed decided. Then something subtle shifted, and certainty began to lose its footing. The larger man walked into the moment already convinced of the outcome. He did not need to calculate possibilities or read the room carefully, because in his experience, size had always simplified situations. Mass had a way of resolving uncertainty quickly. People hesitated when they saw him. Resistance softened before it fully formed. Outcomes followed a familiar pattern, and that familiarity felt reliable. He expected the same pattern to repeat here. In his mind, the situation was already moving toward resolution. He imagined tension, perhaps a show of defiance, maybe even fear. These reactions made sense to him because they were consistent with how others had responded in the past. He did not prepare for anything else because preparation felt unnecessary. When you believe you already understand how something will end, observation feels like wasted effort. What he did not anticipate was calm. Not forced calm or hesitant calm, but genuine composure. Bruce Lee did not react to size because size was not the measure he used to understand situations. He did not interpret mass as authority or weight as dominance. To him, these were external details, not deciding factors. This difference in perspective created a silent divide between the two men. One trusted his body to resolve the moment automatically. The other trusted his awareness to guide him through it. That contrast mattered more than strength or speed, because it shaped how each man processed what was happening in real time. The larger man's confidence encouraged shortcuts in thinking. He relied on assumptions instead of information. He stopped scanning for subtle changes because he believed none would matter. His certainty narrowed his perception, filtering out anything that did not fit his expectation of an easy outcome. This narrowing felt efficient, but it quietly removed flexibility. Bruce Lee did the opposite. He did not assume resolution. He did not rush the moment toward a conclusion. He stayed open to what was actually happening rather than what he expected to happen. His attention remained active, registering balance, movement, intention, and timing, without forcing any of it into a predetermined narrative. Confidence based on appearance often feels strong, but it carries a hidden weakness. It replaces curiosity with certainty. When someone believes their advantage is obvious, they stop collecting information. They stop adjusting. They stop questioning their position. And the moment observation disappears, vulnerability begins to grow. This vulnerability is not emotional. It is structural. It forms when perception lags behind reality. The larger man did not realize that his assumption had already limited his options. By deciding the outcome too early, he reduced his ability to respond to anything unexpected. His confidence locked him into a single path forward. Bruce Lee remained flexible because he never committed to an assumption. He allowed the moment to remain open. That openness preserved choice. It allowed him to respond rather than react, to adapt rather than resist. While the larger man moved forward inside a fixed belief, Bruce Lee stayed aligned with what was actually unfolding. The assumption that mass would settle everything created a false sense of security. It convinced the larger man that awareness was optional. That mistake did not announce itself. It did not feel like a mistake at all. It felt like confidence, and that is why it was so decisive. By the time reality diverged from expectation, the advantage had already shifted, not through force, but through attention. One man had been watching the entire time. The other had stopped, believing there was nothing left to see. That single assumption decided everything long before any visible outcome appeared. Nothing physical happened. No movement broke the stillness. No action announced that anything was about to change. To an outside observer, the moment might have seemed stalled or uneventful. Yet beneath that quiet surface, the outcome was already beginning to take shape in a way that could not be reversed. The larger man stood with confidence that leaned forward before his body did. His expectations guided his posture, his weight committed early, not because he intended to rush, but because he believed the situation belonged to him by default. Balance for him was something he assumed rather than managed. His size had always allowed him to move this way, trusting mass to correct whatever imbalance appeared. This manner of movement revealed more than he realized. Expectation replaced attention. He did not feel the need to stay fully present because his mind had already decided the ending. When certainty takes over, the body follows that certainty blindly. Subtle adjustments are ignored. Fine control is replaced by momentum. Awareness narrows until only the expected outcome remains visible. Bruce Lee experienced the moment differently. He did not interpret movement as threat or dominance. He read it as information. The way weight shifted. The way balance settled too soon. The way intention committed itself before conditions were fully understood. These details did not require calculation because his training had already made them familiar. Years of discipline had shaped his perception to recognize structure instead of strength, alignment instead of mass, timing instead of force. This difference in perception created the real advantage. It was not speed. It was not power. It was clear. Bruce Lee did not need to guess what would happen next, because the information was already present in how the larger man moved and stood. Every assumption revealed itself through posture and balance. Every expectation left a trace. The larger man relied on certainty. Certainty felt strong, but it was rigid. It locked him into a single understanding of the moment. Once that understanding formed, he stopped adapting. His body followed belief rather than reality. That belief carried him forward with confidence, but it also reduced his ability to adjust once conditions changed. Bruce Lee relied on clarity. Clarity kept options open. It allowed perception to remain flexible. Instead of committing early, he stayed responsive. Instead of forcing an outcome, he allowed the moment to reveal its weaknesses naturally. His awareness did not rush ahead of reality. It stayed aligned with it. As seconds passed, the gap between certainty and clarity widened. The larger man became more committed to his expectation with every subtle movement. Bruce Lee became more informed with every detail he observed. This imbalance grew quietly, unnoticed by the one who believed he already understood the situation. Advantage formed not through action, but through patience. Not through dominance, but through observation. The larger man carried momentum that felt empowering, yet momentum without awareness is difficult to control. Bruce Lee carried stillness that appeared passive, yet stillness paired with attention is deeply informed. This is how the real advantage formed. Not suddenly, and not dramatically. It formed gradually, as one man stopped learning and the other never did. Every second of continued awareness strengthened clarity. Every second of assumption weakened adaptability. By the time anything visible was about to occur, the advantage was already established. One man was operating inside a fixed expectation. The other was operating inside the moment itself. The difference between those two states is decisive. Even when nothing seems to be happening. Nothing physical happened at first, but everything that mattered was already in motion. What followed did not look the way most people imagine a confrontation. There was no explosion of movement, no exchange meant to impress, no moment that felt dramatic or cinematic. Instead, everything unfolded with quiet efficiency. The larger man never realized when control slipped away from him, because control was never seized aggressively. It simply dissolved under the weight of his own assumptions. Control often feels like something solid, something you either have or lose in a clear moment. In reality, it can erode silently. The larger man believed control belonged to him because it always had before. His size had created outcomes without requiring precision. That history made him comfortable committing fully, trusting momentum to carry him through. What he did not recognize was that commitment without balance creates vulnerability rather than power. Timing replaced force in an instant that barely registered. There was no struggle because struggle requires opposition. Bruce Lee did not meet strength with strength. He did not push against mass or challenge it head-on. Instead, he allowed movement to complete itself, intervening only where timing made effort unnecessary. When timing is exact, force becomes irrelevant. Position replaced resistance just as quietly. The larger man's body had already committed to a direction that assumed dominance. Once committed, adjusting became difficult. Balance that had felt stable moments earlier now required correction. The body that once felt unstoppable became hard to control because its own momentum worked against it. This is why the encounter ended before it seemed to begin. The larger man never felt overpowered. He felt disoriented. Control did not disappear in a single moment. It fragmented. One adjustment came too late. Another was unnecessary. Each attempt to regain stability only increased imbalance. Alone, without noise or witnesses, the truth surfaced without distraction. There was no audience to perform for, no pride to defend publicly, no explanation to soften the outcome. In that silence, the reality of the situation became undeniable. Strength had not failed. It had been misapplied. Size did not fail because it was insufficient. It failed because it was unbalanced. Mass without alignment becomes difficult to manage. Power without precision creates exposure. Momentum without awareness removes the ability to adapt. These truths reveal themselves quickly when nothing interferes with them. The larger man did not lose because he was weaker. He lost because he relied on what had always worked, without considering whether it still applied. His body moved confidently, but confidence does not guarantee control. Control comes from awareness, timing, and alignment working together. This is why the encounter felt sudden in hindsight. There was no prolonged struggle because there was no equal exchange. One side was operating on assumption, the other was operating on clarity. Once imbalance appeared, the outcome followed naturally. The moment did not escalate because it did not need to. It resolved itself through efficiency rather than effort. What seemed unstoppable moments earlier became difficult to manage, not through force but through precision. By the time the larger man understood what had happened, the encounter was already over. Not loudly, not dramatically, just clearly. When everything settled, there was no celebration to mark the end and no explanation offered to frame what had just happened. The space did not fill with words because words were unnecessary. The moment itself had already delivered its message with a clarity that language would only dilute. Silence remained, not as an absence, but as a conclusion that needed no reinforcement. In that quiet, understanding began to form. It did not arrive as embarrassment or anger. It arrived as recognition, the kind that reshapes how a person interprets strength, control, and confidence. The larger man understood that what had failed was not his body but the belief he had placed inside it. He had trusted assumptions more than awareness, and that trust had quietly undone him. Strength that depends on assumption cannot adapt, because assumption freezes perception. When someone believes they already know how a situation will unfold, they stop collecting information, they stop adjusting, they stop listening to the moment as it changes. That rigidity feels powerful until it meets something unexpected. Then it becomes fragile, not because it lacks force, but because it lacks flexibility. Power that ignores awareness follows the same path. Awareness is what keeps power responsive. Without it, power becomes blunt and predictable. The larger man had relied on the memory of past success to guide him forward, but memory does not respond to present conditions. When reality no longer matched expectation, there was no framework left to adapt. Confidence that has never been tested often feels invincible because it has never been required to evolve. It remains unchallenged, supported by familiarity rather than truth. The moment reality stops cooperating, that confidence does not gradually weaken. It collapses suddenly because it has no depth to fall back on. What the silence revealed was not humiliation, but exposure. It showed the difference between believing in strength and understanding it. It showed that control is not something declared or assumed, it is something maintained moment by moment through awareness and alignment. When awareness leaves, control follows, even if nothing appears to change at first. Bruce Lee did not celebrate, because there was nothing to celebrate. He did not explain, because explanation would have shifted focus away from the lesson itself. He allowed the silence to remain intact, because silence preserved the truth of what had happened. Any attempt to frame it would have softened its impact. He did not prove anything, because proof invites comparison, and comparison distracts from understanding. Instead, he revealed something fundamental, that mastery does not need witnesses, that real capability does not demand recognition, and that the clearest lessons often arrive without confrontation. In the stillness that followed, the larger man was left with clarity rather than defeat. He saw that what had always worked had done so only within familiar conditions. Outside those conditions, reliance on assumption became a liability. That realization carried more weight than any physical outcome could have. The silence held that understanding gently but firmly. It allowed the lesson to settle without resistance. Nothing needed to be added. Nothing needed to be taken away. The moment had already completed itself. What was understood in that silence was simple and lasting. Strength must adapt to remain strength. Power must remain aware to remain power, and confidence must be tested to become real. Bruce Lee did not prove anything. He revealed something that could not be unseen. What stayed after the encounter was not pain, shock, or anger. It was awareness. The kind that lingers quietly and reshapes how future moments are approached. Physical encounters end quickly, but the understanding formed in their aftermath can last far longer. This moment did not echo because of force. It echoed because of clarity. The larger man walked away carrying more than the memory of imbalance. He carried a realization that his previous certainty had been conditional. It had worked only in situations that never demanded precision, patience, or adaptability. That realization altered how he would interpret strength going forward, because it exposed the limits of relying on appearance alone. Moments like this last because they interrupt patterns people trust. When a belief system works repeatedly, it hardens into identity. Size had become part of how the man understood himself and his place in the world. When that understanding failed quietly and completely, it forced reevaluation. Not dramatic reevaluation, but honest reconsideration. This is why the moment mattered beyond the physical outcome. It showed that advantage is not permanent. It must be renewed through awareness. Anything that stops being examined eventually stops being reliable. Strength that is never questioned becomes careless. Confidence that is never tested becomes fragile. The silence after the encounter allowed that truth to settle without defense. There was no argument to resist, no explanation to dismiss. The lesson was not imposed. It was discovered, and lessons discovered this way are difficult to forget. For Bruce Lee, nothing needed to change. He did not gain something from the encounter. He simply remained aligned with what he already understood. Awareness had guided him before the moment, through the moment, and beyond it. That consistency is what made the difference feel so sharp to the one who had relied on assumption. What lingered was the understanding that mastery is quiet, adaptable, and present. It does not depend on favorable conditions. It does not wait for advantage to be granted. It exists regardless of who is watching or how the moment appears. This is why the moment lasted. Not because it was violent, but because it was revealing. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was undeniable. It showed how easily certainty can fail, and how deeply awareness can carry someone through uncertainty. Long after the space returned to normal, the lesson remained intact. Strength is not what you assume it is. Control is not what it appears to be, and the most decisive moments often pass without spectacle, leaving behind only understanding for those willing to accept it. That is why this moment endured. What this moment ultimately revealed was not a technique, a strategy, or a physical principle. It revealed a rule that operates quietly beneath many encounters in life, a rule most people never consciously notice until it works against them. The rule is simple but unforgiving. Reality responds to awareness, not assumption. The larger man entered the moment, believing past success guaranteed future outcomes. That belief felt reasonable because it had been reinforced again and again. When something works often enough, it becomes trusted without question. Over time, that trust turns into expectation, and expectation slowly replaces attention. This is how people stop seeing clearly while believing they see perfectly. Bruce Lee operated under a different rule. He did not trust patterns blindly. He trusted presence. Instead of assuming the moment would follow a familiar script, he allowed it to unfold while staying fully engaged with what was actually happening. That choice did not look dramatic, but it was decisive. Awareness kept him aligned with reality while assumption pulled the other man away from it. This rule applies far beyond physical encounters. In conversations, in decisions, in competition, and in everyday interactions, people lose alignment the moment they believe they no longer need to observe. Familiarity breeds comfort, comfort dulls perception, and dulled perception creates blind spots. Those blind spots are where outcomes change quietly. The moment showed that mastery is not about forcing results. It is about staying connected long enough to respond accurately. When awareness remains active, options remain open. When awareness fades, options collapse into a single path that feels safe until it suddenly isn't. What made this rule so powerful was that it revealed itself without confrontation. No one needed to explain it. No one needed to defend it. The outcome demonstrated it naturally. One person stayed present. The other relied on certainty. Reality favored the one who remained attentive. This is why the lesson feels uncomfortable when it is understood. It removes excuses. It shows that many failures are not caused by lack of ability but by lack of attention. People often lose not because they are weaker, slower, or less capable, but because they stopped watching at the wrong moment. The quiet rule revealed here is relentless. It does not care about reputation, history, or confidence. It responds only to alignment with the present. Those who remain attentive move with reality. Those who assume fall out of step with it. This is what the moment left behind. Not a story about dominance, but a reminder about vigilance. Not a lesson about size or strength, but about perception and presence. It showed that awareness is not a passive trait. It is an active discipline that must be maintained continuously. Once this rule is seen, it cannot be unseen. Every situation begins to look different. Every moment asks the same question. Are you observing or are you assuming? The answer to that question quietly determines outcomes long before they become visible. That is what Section 6 reveals. Not how the encounter ended, but why it unfolded the way it did. Awareness stayed. Assumption didn't. And reality followed the one who remained present. Nothing about the end demanded attention. There was no final gesture, no explanation, no moment designed to be remembered. Yet what remained carried more weight than anything dramatic ever could. A clear understanding settled in, untouched by noise or interpretation. The encounter did not change the world around it. It changed how reality was read. It showed that advantage is rarely taken by force and almost never announced. It forms quietly where awareness stays active and assumption fades. The difference between control and collapse often exists long before anything visible happens. This moment was never about size, speed, or dominance. It was about alignment, about how quickly confidence loses value when it stops being examined, and about how presence, when maintained, reshapes outcomes without effort. When the space returned to normal, nothing looked different, but the lesson remained intact, waiting to be recognized in future moments. Because once you understand that awareness is the real edge, you begin to notice how often it is surrendered too easily. That is what this moment leaves behind.